Hello to everyone that might be watching online as well or at a later time. Hello to Amy, who I just met tonight. So we're looking at Deborah, although I do note Ben said Deborah this morning. So that threw me a little bit. I thought, am I meant to know that? Because
That's the Hebrew way.
the Hebrew way of saying it, right? So Deborah, that's just a bit. I was like, maybe he knows something I don't. But however you want to say it, we're talking about the prophetess, the mother and judge. So this is based off Judges chapter 4 and 5. I'm not going to read that in detail because I'll run through as part of the presentation, which will flip over. I'm seeing it on this screen, and it will come up on the screen there in a moment when it gets flicked over. There it is. The colours are a bit off, but you'll get the point. So that's what we're going to do, and yeah, the reason we don't have to have the reading straight up is because we'll be covering the story anyway. So, what we'll be doing is looking at some of the facts, a rundown about who Deborah was, a bit about the time that she was living in, so a couple of facts and figures, paint a bit of a context story. Abby's saying, am I speaking loudly enough? Oh, slow down, okay. So, not too slow, otherwise you won't get supper. We'll paint a picture of the time period, look at the context, look at her story as recorded in the Bible, and conclude by looking at some take-home lessons that Paul alluded to that we'll get. So, some of the basics. Deborah means bee. There's a picture of a bee. She was a prophetess, and as a prophetess, God used her to deliver his messages to his people. So that's what her job as a prophetess was, which was to deliver God's message and messages to his people. There are multiple prophetesses in the Bible, so female prophets that are female, prophetesses. Not a conclusive list, but some of them are Moses' sister Miriam, Huldah, Anna, and Philip's daughters. There are more that aren't named. So there's, a handful and a bit. However, what makes Deborah stand out is that she's the only female judge. So that's what's special or unique about Deborah in the Bible. Her husband's name was Lapidoth. Don't know if I've said that correctly. We'll find out what that means in a moment. And interestingly, as with many things in the Bible, the story is actually told twice, just to have an effect. Once more factually, more structured as you would expect, and then in chapter 5, it's in poetic form, which is interesting as well. You can always have a look in your own time if you're interested. So there's lots of poetry in the Bible, and that's one way of reinforcing the message of chapter 4, but in poetic form. All right, not going to quiz you on this. It's just for those who really like some facts and figures about the 12 judges of Israel, and there you'll see number 4 is Deborah. And I don't know if it's readable or not, but there you go. The unique fact, as I mentioned, is she's the only woman that's a judge. Now, judges in the ancient times is a little bit different. Their role is a little bit different from what we might think of a judge today. Similar, but different. While judge is the closest literal translation of the Hebrew term, the position that we're talking about here is more one of unelected, so they're not necessarily elected, they're unelected, non-hereditary, so not the royal family, and it's about leadership. So in accordance with the needs of the time, their functions were primarily martial, not marital, although they probably did some of that too, and judicial. So a little bit like a king as well. So Deborah, as you can see on the screen, was the 4th judge. And as a judge, God gave her the authority to render civil court decisions. How on earth did a female at that time become a judge? Well, the answer I have for you is the plainest that I can think of, which is God placed her there, and she was needed at that time for what the people needed. We are led to believe, though, that she was the one who held on to hope, and that will become more clear as you see the story unfold. She was the one who held on to hope. She really believed in the impossible, really. And she holds on to hope for the entire nation, not just herself. So when the people didn't even believe in themselves, she was able to give them some of that hope and push them forward. We notice in the story that we'll see that Barak, who's one of the characters we'll be introduced to shortly, he knows what to do, but he needs Deborah to come with him. Right. Just very briefly, I thought this was interesting, a little bit about what the Bible says about judges and how they should operate. So 2nd of Chronicles 19 verses 6 to 7 that you can see there on the screen. This is advice for judges. Consider carefully what you do, because you are not judging for man or woman, but for the Lord, who is with you whenever you give a verdict. Now let the fear of the Lord be upon you. Judge carefully, for with the Lord our God there is no injustice or partiality or bribery. I think that summary there probably stands for today, advice for today as well. And just one more, Leviticus 19 verse 15, more advice for judges that was given. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favouritism to the great, but judge your neighbour fairly. So that all pretty much makes sense, but that was the guidance, and it's interesting to see that laid out. All right, a bit about Deborah's ability to inspire. So she was known as a prophetess and respected for her godly character. And as a prophetess, she did not formulate rulings in the traditional manner, but was God's spokesperson. Her feminine character was appropriate for leading that particular generation. As Deborah herself stated, I arose as a mother to Israel. So her ability to inspire and empower was the source of her effectiveness, both as a public leader and as a wife. And as we heard earlier, Deborah was the wife of Lapidoth. Interesting that this means torches or light. And as was the case back in those days, it was related to what work they did. I did very quick Google search on this, so hopefully it's correct. Together with her husband, Deborah made wicks for the menorah in the temple, thus helping to spread the light of God among the people. So there's the connection to the names. All right. So Judges 4 verse 5 tells us about Deborah, and she dwelt under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in Mount Ephraim. And the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. So this tells us that she had a base, somewhere that people knew she would be, and they could come and approach her to cast judgment, to help with issues, all sorts of things. So just emphasising, she didn't necessarily all the time go out to the people. They, in this verse, were being told that they would come to her because she dwelt under the tree. There is symbolism that we'll see in a bit as well. All right, some of the characters. I like a good character slide so you can see it all summarised on the one screen. We have Deborah that we've been talking about on the left. She's the judge and prophetess. Her name means bee. We have Barak, and he was from a place called Kadesh Naphtali, and his name means lightning. So there you go. Jabin, who we'll get to see what's happening with these people in a moment. He was the king of Canaan, and his name means God has built. Sisera was Jabin's army commander, so a very tough guy. Now, Google and all the different pages don't agree on what his name means. There are lots of different versions. Servant of Ra could mean keen and swift, or this came up often enough to put it on the slide, that sees a horse or swallow. That came up often, so not just one source. I don't have a detailed explanation for you, but that was interesting. And Jael, who was Heber's wife, we'll see what role she plays in this story. Her name means wild gazelle, and that does kind of match her actions. Right, I like my facts and figures and interesting things about the times, so I'll read my notes so I don't get lost. We'll look at the state of the land when Deborah was a judge. Deborah became a judge at the time Israel was experiencing a spiritual and moral decline, partly due to the loss of their national leaders Moses and Joshua. For years, the Israelites had intermarried with idol-worshipping nations, which God had long ago commanded Israel to destroy. God once again found that he had to teach his people to fear and obey him, which was the only way that they would have true peace and prosperity. So God decided to use Jabin, king of Canaan, and his tool as his tool of Israel's punishment. So headquartered at the city of Hazor, Jabin sent 900, and this is where the picture comes into play, 900 deadly iron-wheeled chariots and a massive army. So that's quite a lot, especially for the day, to descend upon the Israelites, spreading panic and terror throughout the land. For the next 20 years, King Jabin, with Sisera, who Saul was his army commander, maintained brutal control over the lives of the Israelites. So there was oppression. So there was a bit of talk about these chariots, and we'll see how God uses the earth and the elements to bring about swift victory for the Israelites based on the limitations of these chariots. So we get some context on the state of the land from Judges 4 verses 1 to 3, which I'll just read out. And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord when Ehud was dead, and the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan. So that idea that they're under oppression is what it's referring to when it says sold them into the hand of. And that he reigned in Hazor. The captain of whose host was Sisera. We've seen that character on a previous slide, which dwelt in Harosheth, again no quizzes, of the Gentiles. And the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. That's a key point, isn't it? So they cried out. They were fed up, as you would be. For he had 900 chariots of iron, and 20 years he mightily oppressed the children of Israel. So yes, those chariots were a terrifying force. You can imagine them at pace, rushing towards you, 900 plus lots of people. We're getting very close now to the story and the tumultuous ending of how this happens. So in Judges 4 verse 6, it says, and she, so Deborah, sent and called Barak the son of Abinoam out of Kadesh Naphtali. This is after the children cried out. So this is a response that through Deborah, the prophetess, God gives to the people because they cried out. And said unto him, hath not the Lord God of Israel commanded, saying, go and draw toward Mount Tabor, and take with thee 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and the children of Zebulun. So this is about Deborah again, as God's messenger at the time, working to get Barak to go into war and become victorious. So Deborah was a judge. She wasn't a warrior. She didn't lead Israel into battle. She judged the people, but she could get Barak into action, into line. God blessed her with spiritual insight, but during this time, no man had stepped forward to lead Israel. Even the leader of the army had to be called forward and reminded. So, there's a little bit of a thought bubble there. What happened? Why did Barak, why was he a bit hesitant to go? In what way did God perhaps make his plan known to Barak and what he wanted Barak to do beforehand? I'm not going to answer. These are more rhetorical questions we can think about. So the good news is we know the answers to what happened here. Barak eventually became okay with what he had to do, but hadn't done it yet. However, he respected and believed the words of Deborah that she gave him, as she was a prophetess and was encouraged on hearing her words to take the step forward and go ahead with God's plan. So, reading the story from Judges 4 verse 8, Barak said to her, that's Deborah, "If you will go with me, I will go." So he wanted that support. "But if you will not go with me, I will not go." And she, that's Deborah, said, "I will surely go with you." So she said, "Yes, I'll go with you, Barak. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory. For the Lord will sell Sisera," that's the army commander of the opposing army, "into the hand of a woman." There you go. So as God's messenger, she knew how this was going to end. Not only did she know that they would win, but she even knew how that was going to come about, which is pretty cool, actually, that she had that insight. So Deborah said, "Yes, I'll go with you, Barak," and she was a woman of her word. And she arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called out Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up at his heels, and Deborah went with him. 10,000 sounds like, I guess that's a lot. They were outnumbered, as is often the case with Israel in the Bible. So they were outnumbered. So the idea here and the lesson, you can take many lessons as you will, but I'll just state it as it's telling us. Because Barak hesitated, the idea and the notion is that the glory of the victory ultimately in killing Sisera would go to a woman. So we're now introduced to a man named Heber. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but that's how I read it. If you read verse 17 of the chapter, it tells you that he was a Kenite. So who were the Kenites? Well, they were a people who lived in the land of Canaan, and they were closely associated with the Midianites. So Judges 4 verse 11 in our story says, "Now Heber the Kenite, separating himself from the rest of the Kenites from the children of Hobab, the brother-in-law of Moses, had put up his tent as far away as the oak tree," there's some interesting names here, Zananim, by Kadesh. So even though Heber was a Kenite from Canaan, home of Jabin and Sisera the enemy, he was actually living as far away as an oak tree by Kadesh. And it's interesting to note that Kadesh means sanctuary. Not sure if this confuses the matter or not, but it's a map. We've got Mount Carmel on the left and Mount Tabor here. Some of the focus of the battle. So there's Barak with Deborah going forward with 10,000 men, and we're going to read what happens. So from Judges 4 verse 14, "Upon the word of Deborah," so she was quite the leader in this force, "Barak went down from Mount Tabor with his 10,000 men to face an army 10 times greater." So you know how we were talking about Israel always seems to be outnumbered. They had facing an army 10 times greater. Quite possibly they were on foot and badly armed. I don't know, I can't verify that, but they might not have had it as advanced implements as the chariots and other items of the opposing army. So Sisera and his men were ready in the valley beside the river. And this is where we'll see God use the elements to cause a victory. So the river Kishon flows in a northwest direction through the Jezreel Valley until it empties into the Mediterranean Sea near present-day Haifa. Because the land is flat, the river is usually not much more than a sluggish stream. However, in times of hard rains, it can overflow its banks and flood the land. Guess what happened? It overflowed the banks and flooded the land. And what do you think happens to chariots that are in mud? They get bogged. So that's poetic, isn't it? So this is essentially how God brought about the victory. So Judges 5, this is the poetic form now of the story. The river of Kishon swept them away. That ancient river, the river Kishon. O my soul, you trampled in strength. Then did the hooves of horses beat from the galloping of their mighty ones. So they were brought down by the weather elements. Fun fact, this exact scenario happened again in 1799. And it happened when Napoleon defeated the Turks in that very same valley. So there you go. All right, a bit of a gruesome slide. If you don't like this sort of thing, look away. It's pretty tame, but I do need to tell the story. So Sisera fled on foot. So you can imagine there's mud everywhere, the chariots aren't working, things are not going the way that this tough army commander thought they would. So the chariot had become a hindrance and he fled on foot. And since Heber's, you go, why on earth did you bring up this person called Heber? Heber's family was of the Kenites, people of Canaan. Sisera felt safe in hiding in the family tent. So he ran off to flee to a family tent where he felt safe. Not only did he stay in their tent, but Jael, Heber's wife, served him. So the story is, I'll get through it, Sisera asked for water, but Jael gave him milk. There's some bit of symbolism, and also the plain thing about milk is it makes you sleepy rather than quenching your thirst. So I think this was premeditated. All right, so this is the account in Judges 5, verse 25. We'll read what happened. He, that's Sisera, asked for water, and she, Jael, gave him milk. She brought forth butter in a lordly dish. She put her hand to the peg and her right hand to the workman's hammer. She hammered Sisera. She smashed his head. She pierced and struck through his temple. He bowed between her feet. He fell. He lay down. Between her feet he bowed. He fell. Where he bowed, there he fell down dead. I did tell you this was the poetic version of the events. And just one more verse there about the story. And behold, as Barak followed Sisera, so he was following, but he wasn't quite there yet, Jael came out to meet him, and the job was done, and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you seek." It's a bit interesting, isn't it, that these people don't have cell phones and they don't communicate and they don't text all day on social media. It's not like she was like, now this is happening, now this is happening. She came out to meet him as if to expect him coming, and she says, yep, he's in the tent. So read into that how you will. So the glory was given to a woman. How are we doing for time? We're okay.
1826.
Perfect. We'll get to supper soon. Sometimes you put a slide in. It's not exactly part of the story. I thought it was interesting. Hope it doesn't completely bore you. But in the last part of the Song of Deborah is a sketch of a third woman, not an Israelite like Deborah and Jael, but a Canaanite enemy. And that is Sisera's mother standing at a window. That's what it's meant to be depicting, watching the road and waiting anxiously for her son. So there's a bit of reality that Sisera has a mother who's waiting for him to come home. But as the reader knows, he doesn't come home. So Judges 5 verse 28, this is the poetic version. The mother of Sisera looked out a window and cried through the lattice, "Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why do the wheels of his chariot wait?" And one commentator suggests the following, so I'll read a short paragraph from a commentator on this. The mention of Sisera's mother almost seems out of place here, amongst a compact story in a chapter, but perhaps it was for a lesson. The image of a woman watching at a window had special significance for the people who listened to the story. It was a common image of the goddess in Canaanite religion. Clay statues dug up at the archaeological site of Ugarit show a woman's face looking out from a lattice window like that of Sisera's mother mentioned in Judges 5. Perhaps it served as a warning to the Canaanite goddess worshippers. So that was one commentator's thoughts on that. It was included in the story, so I thought I'd mention it. So here we're getting to the result and the lessons. So the result was not only victory over an enemy, but peace for 40 years. Judges 5 verse 31 tells us, "So let all thine enemies perish, O Lord, but let them that love him be as the sun when he goeth forth in his might," and the land had rest for 40 years. So an emphasis that Deborah is the one who held on to the hope, who was a driving force to make this all happen. So the palm tree, just very quickly, it's a national symbol for Israel. This is the palm tree that Deborah was sitting under as she judged the people, that they would come to find her. There's coins that have been found with palm trees on them, so it was, again, a tree of significance. The obvious thing is that it provides shade from the sun. It's also very firmly planted. I'm not a very big gardener, but I do know that there are lots of different types of tree trunks, and I'm told from very quick research that this palm tree type in particular has a very strong trunk and is very firmly planted. So there's some imagery and lesson there. And the Psalms have something to say about the palm tree, which I'll just quickly read out from 92 verses 12, I think, to 14 or 15. "The righteous will flourish like the palm tree. They shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon. Those that are planted in the house of Yahweh shall flourish in the courts of our God. They shall still bring forth fruit in an old age. They shall be fat and flowering, to show that Yahweh is upright. He is my rock, and no unrighteousness is in him." Barak is mentioned in Hebrews 11. Couldn't not mention this. So is it fair that it doesn't say Deborah? It says Barak. So he's listed amongst other people of faith in Hebrews 11 verse 32. Bit of a thought bubble for ourselves. Are we sometimes like Barak? So Paul, in his opening, mentioned about lessons for us, and this is the part where we start thinking about some potential lessons that may or may not apply to us. But perhaps we are a bit like Barak sometimes. So we know what we should do, but just need a spiritual shove, which is what seems to have happened in this story. In a symbolic way, we are all Barak, with Jesus helping us bear the load. So in that commentary there, we're almost putting us aside a bit like Barak and Deborah. And there's us and Jesus, where Jesus is helping us along and saying, hold on to that hope and come on, I'll go with you, I'll come with you. So there's some imagery there, or metaphors, I should say. A couple of slides to finish off on lessons. So the book of Judges illustrates the need for a righteous king, and of course that points forward to Jesus. The judges are rulers, saviours, spiritual deliverers, but Jesus is the saviour and king of his people. there's a thought bubble here that Barak was suffering from spiritual short-sightedness, not able to see the bigger picture or maybe believe in where it was going. But God does have a master plan. I'm not sure that's actually the right couple of words that I should use, but he's got an end in sight, and he asks us to go along that journey. Right, a couple more. God works in mysterious ways. That really frustrates me sometimes, that saying. But it's true, I think. Can I get a nod? Is it true? Yeah. Mysterious to us. So maybe it's not something that we would have thought of at the time. Maybe it wouldn't have happened the way we thought. So it's a bit of a mystery to us, not to God. Not going to read all that out, but there's themes of leadership in this story, faith and courage, and there's the more modern day buzzword of collaboration or working together. Does anyone else have anything they want to mention about the story? You don't have to. I've been told that if you do, I need to bring the microphone around, so there you go. Does anyone want to mention anything, perhaps another lesson or something that they want to share?
Covered very well.
Okay, thank you, Paul. All right, well, with that, I'll hand back to Paul to close us out, and then we'll get our supper. Thank you all. Thanks for coming and listening.